The cold Pacific morning of December 7, 1941, shattered with the roar of aircraft engines and the shriek of falling bombs. At Pearl Harbor Naval Hospital, nurses rushed to prepare for what they could not yet fathom. Within 3 hours, 452 wounded sailors and soldiers would flood through those doors. Physicians scrambled for supplies. Blood was desperately needed, but the hospital possessed only 750 packages of dried plasma for 960 casualties. Many would die not from their wounds, but from shock, their bodies draining of the precious fluid that kept them alive. And yet, the very substance that would save those who survived, the plasma separation technique that made battlefield medicine possible, had been dismissed just years earlier as impractical. The man who perfected it, who proved skeptics wrong, who organized the greatest blood collection effort in history, would never be allowed to donate his own blood to the program he created. His name was Charles Richard Drew, and this is the story of how an ignored idea became the difference between life and death for millions. If this kind of untold history fascinates you, take a moment now to subscribe to this channel and activate notifications. You will not want to miss what comes next. Charles Richard Drew entered the world on June 3, 1904, in the Foggy Bottom neighborhood of Washington, District of Columbia. His father, Richard, worked as a carpet layer and held a unique distinction as the only non-white member of the Carpet, Linoleum, and Soft Tile Layers Union. His mother, Nora Burrell Drew, was a graduate of the minor normal school, though she never practiced teaching. The Drew household emphasized education, church attendance, civic responsibility, and personal independence. These values would shape young Charlie, as everyone called him, into a man who refused to accept limitations others placed upon him. At 12 years old, Charlie became a newspaper boy. He sold papers from a street corner stand, but he did not remain there long. Within a year, he had organized 6 other boys to work for him, expanding his territory across the neighborhood. He was learning leadership before he understood what leadership meant. As he grew older, his jobs multiplied. He supervised city playgrounds in summer. He worked as a lifeguard at the local swimming pool. He took construction jobs to earn money. Each experience built something within him, a relentless drive to excel, to organize, to create systems where none existed. Washington during those years was racially segregated, yet it hosted a vibrant African-American community with prosperous, well-educated families. The public schools serving black students were often excellent, and Charlie attended Stevens Elementary before enrolling at Dunbar High School. Dunbar stood as one of the finest college preparatory schools in the entire country, for black or white students alike. Here Charlie discovered he was no ordinary student. He was extraordinary, though not in the way one might expect. Charlie Drew was not an academic star. His grades were merely adequate, but on the athletic field he became a legend. He lettered in 4 sports. He won the James E. Walker Medal for all-round athletic performance in both his junior and senior years. His classmates voted him best athlete, most popular student, and the student who had done the most for the school. He served as captain of Company B in the 3rd Regiment of the High School Cadet Corps. Young Charlie seemed destined for a future in athletics, perhaps engineering. His senior yearbook noted his aspiration to become an electrical engineer. Medicine appeared nowhere in his plans. Then tragedy struck. In 1920, Charlie's oldest sister, Elsie, contracted tuberculosis complicated by influenza. The disease ravaged her young body. Doctors could do little. Charlie watched helplessly as his sister weakened, struggled for breath, and finally slipped away. The experience left a wound that never fully healed. But from that wound emerged something new, a burning curiosity about medicine, about healing, about the science of saving lives. The electrical engineer Charlie had imagined becoming began to fade. In his place, a future physician started to take shape. In 1922, Charlie Drew arrived at Amherst College in Massachusetts on an athletic scholarship. He was one of only 13 black students in a student body of 600. On the football field and track, he faced hostility from opposing teams who saw his skin color before they saw his talent. But Charlie responded the only way he knew how. He outperformed them all. His achievements at Amherst became legendary. Decades later, long after he had distinguished himself as a pioneer of blood banking, many still remembered him first as that remarkable athlete. Yet something shifted during those college years. His biology courses with Professor Otto Glaser awakened a dormant passion. The intricacies of the human body, the elegant machinery of cells and tissues, the mystery of blood flowing through vessels, all of it captivated him. Combined with the memory of his sister's death and his own hospitalization for a football injury, these experiences crystallized his purpose. When Charlie graduated from Amherst in 1926 with his bachelor's degree, he knew he wanted to become a physician. There was only one problem. He had no money for medical school. To earn the funds he needed, Drew took a position at Morgan College, now Morgan State University, in Baltimore. He served as athletic director and instructor of biology and chemistry. During his 2 years at Morgan, his coaching transformed mediocre sports teams into serious collegiate competitors. He was proving what he would demonstrate throughout his life, that any system could be improved, any challenge overcome, with the right combination of intelligence, organization, and relentless effort. The racial segregation of pre-civil rights America severely constrained Drew's options for medical training. Some prestigious schools like Harvard accepted a small number of non-white students each year, but most African Americans aspiring to medical careers trained at black institutions such as Howard University in Washington or Meharry Medical College in Nashville. Drew applied to Howard but was not accepted. He lacked enough English credits from his Amherst education. Harvard accepted him but wanted to defer his admission to the following year. Charlie Drew was not a man who waited. He applied instead to McGill University in Montreal, Canada, which had earned a reputation for better treatment of minorities. McGill accepted him. In 1929, Charlie Drew crossed the border into Canada to begin his medical education. He would emerge transformed. At McGill, Drew was permitted to play on school teams, and once again he became a star athlete. But something else happened. The young man who had been an average student at Amherst became exceptional. He won the J. Francis Williams Prize in medicine. He won the annual scholarship prize in neuroanatomy. He worked on the McGill Medical Journal and was elected to Alpha Omega Alpha, the prestigious Medical Honor Society. When he graduated in 1933, he stood second in a class of 137. The athlete had become a scholar. During his internship and surgical residency at Montreal General Hospital from 1933 to 1935, Drew worked closely with Professor John Beatty, a bacteriologist exploring ways to treat shock using transfusion and fluid replacement. This collaboration planted a seed. Drew became fascinated by the problems of blood, its preservation, its storage, its ability to save lives when administered correctly. He could not know it then, but this fascination would change the world. Drew hoped to extend his training with a surgical residency in the United States, preferably at the prestigious Mayo Clinic. But major American medical centers rarely accepted African American residents. White patients of that era often refused treatment from black physicians. The doors that talent and determination should have opened remained firmly shut. In 1935, Drew joined the faculty at Howard University College of Medicine, starting as a pathology instructor and progressing to surgical instructor and chief surgical resident at Freedman's Hospital. Howard's College of Medicine was undergoing transformation with help from the Rockefeller Foundation's General Education Board. The effort included appointing well-qualified department chairs to establish residency programs and train black successors. Drew trained for 3 years with Department of Surgery Chair Edward Lee Howes. Then came the opportunity that would define his legacy. He received a fellowship to train with the eminent surgeon Allen O. Whipple at New York's Presbyterian Hospital while earning a doctorate in medical science from Columbia University. At Presbyterian, Drew worked with researcher John Scudder on studies relating to shock treatment, fluid balance, blood chemistry, preservation, and transfusion. His main project, and the foundation of his dissertation, was an experimental blood bank at Presbyterian, which opened in August 1939. Drew threw himself into the work with characteristic intensity. The problems were immense. Blood could be stored for only about 7 days, using conventional methods. Transfusions required careful matching of blood types. Contamination was an ever-present danger, and the quantities needed for any large-scale medical emergency far exceeded what existing systems could provide. Drew approached these challenges systematically. He discovered that plasma, the liquid portion of blood after the cells are removed, could be stored much longer than whole blood. In his 200-page doctoral dissertation titled Banked Blood, A Study in Blood Preservation, he demonstrated that blood could be preserved for extended periods if the red blood cells were separated from the plasma and frozen separately. When a transfusion was needed, the separated elements could be reconstituted. This was not merely a laboratory curiosity. It was a revolution. The technical challenges were formidable. Drew understood that plasma extraction required both centrifugation and liquid extraction conducted under controlled conditions to eliminate contamination risk. Air concealment, ultraviolet light, and the antiseptic merthiolate were all employed to prevent plasma contamination. The team used centrifuging to separate blood components by density and sedimentation to separate particles from liquid. The plasma was then pooled from multiple donations using an anti-contamination technique under strict air and ultraviolet lighting conditions, with samples cultured for bacteria. In June 1940, Drew received his doctorate in medical science from Columbia, becoming the first African American to earn this degree there. He was 36 years old. He had transformed himself from an average student into a pioneering researcher, and the world was about to need him desperately. If you are finding value in this story, consider leaving a like. It helps this content reach others who appreciate real history. While Drew completed his research, Europe was descending into chaos. German forces had swept across France, pushing British and Allied troops into a desperate evacuation at Dunkirk. The British retreated across the Channel, and Germany began the sustained bombing campaign that would become known as the Blitz. London burned. Civilians and soldiers alike suffered terrible wounds, burns, shrapnel injuries, crushing trauma from collapsed buildings. All produced the same deadly result: shock. And the treatment for shock was blood, or its substitute, plasma. Britain was in desperate need of medical supplies. Its own blood collection systems could not keep pace with casualties. Across the Atlantic, members of the Blood Transfusion Betterment Association met with representatives from the National Research Council and the American Red Cross to organize something unprecedented. They called it Blood for Britain. The goal was audacious: collect blood donations at American hospitals, convert the blood into plasma, and ship it across a submarine-infested ocean to save British lives. The program began in August 1940, but it immediately faced problems. Blood was collected from many different hospitals using many different preparation methods. Contamination rates were unacceptably high. The liquid plasma often arrived unusable. The program was on the verge of failure. Someone was needed who could impose order on chaos, standardize procedures, eliminate contamination, and transform a struggling effort into a functioning system. In September 1940, Charles Drew was called back to New York to direct the Blood for Britain project. Drew took charge with the organizational brilliance that had characterized his entire life. From newspaper routes to sports teams to blood banks, he had always understood that success required systems. He instituted uniform procedures and standards for collecting blood and processing plasma at the participating hospitals. He understood that mass processing of plasma could only be safe and practical if collection and processing were carried out using a completely closed, completely aseptic technique. British scientists had been using modified cream separators to separate plasma from red blood cells, a system far more productive than spinning off the red cells using test tubes and centrifuges or simply allowing the cells to separate and settle over several days. Drew ordered 2 of these modified cream separators from England and, with his associates, constructed similar machines to mass-produce clear plasma from the whole blood being collected. The technique was simple in concept but demanding in execution. Speed mattered. Precision mattered. Every step had to be controlled. Drew developed a system to turn the blood into plasma, bottled into 1-liter units, and boxed 6 to a case for transport. The plasma could be stored much longer than whole blood. When refrigerated properly, it remained viable for months. Drew's methods extended plasma's shelf life to up to 2 months, a dramatic improvement over whole blood's 7-day limit. This meant plasma could survive the transatlantic voyage and arrive in Britain ready to save lives. The Blood for Britain project was also intended to gather the research and administrative data needed to launch a nationwide blood banking program if America entered the war. Drew understood that Blood for Britain was not just about helping the British. It was a rehearsal, a test run for the massive effort that would be required when, not if, the United States joined the conflict. Every procedure refined, every problem solved, every lesson learned would pay dividends when American soldiers faced enemy fire. The results exceeded all expectations. By the time Blood for Britain concluded in January 1941, thousands of donations had been processed and shipped. The plasma reached British hospitals and saved lives during the darkest days of the Blitz. Drew had proven that large-scale blood collection and processing was not only possible, but practical. The skeptics who had dismissed plasma separation as too complicated, too expensive, too prone to contamination were silenced. Drew's success brought immediate recognition. He was appointed assistant director of a pilot program for a national blood banking system jointly sponsored by the National Research Council and the American Red Cross. His innovations continued to reshape the field. Among his contributions were mobile blood donation stations, which would later become known as bloodmobiles. These units could travel to factories, offices, and neighborhoods, bringing blood collection to the donors rather than requiring donors to travel to fixed locations. The system dramatically increased the number of donations and would prove essential during the war. Then came the bitter irony that would haunt Drew for the rest of his life. As the blood bank effort expanded in preparation for America's entry into the war, the armed forces initially stipulated that the Red Cross exclude African Americans from donating. The man who had organized the blood program, who had proven plasma separation worked, who had saved British lives with American blood, was deemed ineligible to participate in the program he helped establish because of the color of his skin. The policy was soon modified to accept blood donations from Black Americans, but with a cruel caveat. The blood would be segregated. Blood from black donors would be kept separate from blood from white donors, labeled differently, used only for black recipients. The policy had no scientific basis. Blood is blood. Drew knew this better than anyone. The same plasma that saved a white soldier would save a black soldier. The same transfusion that revived a British civilian would revive an American one. Race had nothing to do with blood type, compatibility, or effectiveness. Throughout the war, Drew criticized these policies publicly as unscientific and insulting to African Americans. He never relented. He never accepted the absurdity quietly. His voice joined a growing chorus, demanding that America live up to its ideals, that science trump prejudice, that the very blood shed to defend democracy not be subject to discrimination. The struggle would continue long after the war ended, but Drew's principled stand marked him as more than a medical pioneer. He was a civil rights advocate before the term existed. In early 1941, Drew passed his American Board of Surgery exams and received certification. He returned to Howard University and, in October, became chair of the Department of Surgery and chief of surgery at Freedman's Hospital. He also became the first African American appointed as an examiner for the American Board of Surgery. For the next 9 years, he devoted himself to training medical students and surgical residents, raising standards in black medical education, and campaigning against the exclusion of black physicians from local medical societies and the American Medical Association. Meanwhile, the plasma program he had helped create was expanding at an unprecedented pace. The American Red Cross blood donor program began in early 1941 and would go on to collect blood from millions of Americans that the military shipped to soldiers fighting overseas. Commercial production of dried plasma ramped up rapidly. The first contract for dried plasma, covering 15,000 packages, was signed in February 1941. More contracts followed as factories converted to wartime production. Dried plasma represented another leap forward. Liquid plasma required refrigeration and had limited shelf life. Dried plasma, processed by removing the water component through freeze-drying, could be stored for years without refrigeration. It was not affected by extremes of heat and cold. From the standpoint of battlefield logistics, the equipment necessary for reconstitution and intravenous administration could be incorporated into a small kit available under almost any conditions. Medics simply added sterile water to reconstitute the powder, then administered it to wounded soldiers. The United Kingdom had been the first combatant nation to seek dry, stable, storable plasma, better suited to battlefield use. A facility dedicated to meeting wartime needs for dried serum and plasma began operating in Britain in 1940. Together, British plants produced over 500,000 bottles of dried plasma during the war. But American production dwarfed these numbers. The biologic and pharmaceutical industries transformed laboratory processes into mass production with remarkable speed. Several million units of plasma per year flowed to the armed forces. Then came December 7, 1941. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor caught America unprepared in countless ways, and medical readiness was no exception. When the first bombs fell, the Naval Hospital at Pearl Harbor held 750 packages of plasma for the entire base. Within hours, 960 casualties overwhelmed the facility. The ratio was devastating. Less than 1 package of plasma per wounded man, and many required multiple units. The hospital staff at Pearl Harbor performed miracles that day. Surgeons worked continuously, performing emergency operations to remove bomb fragments. Dentists became surgeons, working alongside physicians to save lives. Nurses provided pain relief, shock treatment, wound care, and comfort to dying men. Hospital patients left their beds to help with the flood of casualties. Trucks and drivers augmented the fleet of 7 ambulances, making regular runs to pick up the injured. The casualties presented every horror of modern warfare: burns, machine gun wounds, traumatic amputations, penetrating abdominal wounds, lacerations, compound fractures. Almost all suffered from shock. One severely wounded soldier arrived, carried on a door, conscious but with a substantial portion of his abdomen and hip destroyed by shrapnel. Many were beyond help, but those who could be saved needed plasma desperately. Patriotic blood drives had yielded whole blood, from which a small inventory of albumin had been accumulated by that December day. What existed was rushed to Pearl Harbor. But the shortage exposed a terrible truth. America had ignored the warnings. The plasma program, which Drew had helped establish, was still ramping up. Production had not yet reached wartime levels. The country that had shipped plasma across the Atlantic to save British lives during the Blitz could not fully supply its own base in Hawaii. The shock of Pearl Harbor catalyzed the nation. Blood donations surged. Americans lined up at Red Cross centers to give. The supply of blood plasma increased dramatically as the country mobilized for war. The American Legion organized blood donor programs that contributed thousands of pints. Factories, schools, churches, and civic organizations held blood drives. The bloodmobiles Drew had helped pioneer rolled across the nation. By the end of the war, the American Red Cross had collected over 13 million pints for the military, the largest coordinated blood collection effort in human history. Mobile bleeding units were deployed everywhere, even to disciplinary stockades to collect from prisoners who could not report to donor centers. The system Drew had helped design scaled to meet the demands of global war. In the Mediterranean theater, the statistics told the story of plasma's importance. About 70% of field hospital casualties required blood and received an average of 3 pints each. Field hospitals were supplied with all the blood they requested. As fighting moved through Italy, bleeding centers were established in Rome, Florence, and Pisa, creating an unprecedented medical supply chain. The lessons learned from Blood for Britain, applied by the system Drew had helped build, were saving lives on every front. The plasma and serum albumin programs developed during World War II represented one of the greatest achievements in military medicine. Dried plasma could be safely administered without typing or cross-matching. The incidence of adverse reactions was negligible. The equipment required for its use was simple and portable. Medics in foxholes, corpsmen on beaches, nurses in field hospitals all could administer the life-saving fluid. Studies during the war confirmed what Drew had understood. Plasma was effective at restoring blood volume and treating shock. Victims of air raids, soldiers wounded by debris or buried under rubble, patients with burns and crush injuries, all responded well to plasma transfusion. While gross hemorrhage required whole blood to replace lost red cells, plasma could stabilize patients and prevent death from shock until definitive treatment was available. The dating period for plasma proved surprisingly long. Initial regulations set the limit at 1 year, then 2 years, and finally all limitations were removed. Clinical administration of 2-year-old plasma to burned patients showed it remained an excellent agent to combat shock. The plasma had lost some components over time, but it retained the albumin and globulins essential for treating shock and burns. As the war progressed, blood banking technology continued to advance. Whole blood programs eventually supplemented plasma for forward treatment of severely hemorrhaging casualties. Refrigeration equipment capable of functioning under varying conditions of heat, cold, and humidity was developed. Airlift capacity allowed blood to reach the far reaches of the battlefront. The foundation Drew had helped lay supported an entire edifice of wartime medicine. After the war, Drew's legacy lived on in multiple forms. The American Red Cross blood program that exists today is a direct result of his groundbreaking work in mass-producing human plasma. Every blood donation center, every bloodmobile, every unit of plasma or packed red cells used in modern medicine traces its lineage to the systems Drew helped create. The techniques for separating, preserving, and storing blood components that he refined became standard medical practice worldwide. Drew's innovative work was recognized with numerous awards and honors. In 1942, he received the E.S. Jones Award for Research in Medical Science from the John A. Andrew Clinic in Tuskegee. In 1943, he was appointed to the American Soviet Committee on Science. In 1944, he received the Spingarn Medal from the MS ACP for his work on blood and plasma, the organization's highest honor. Honorary doctorates followed from Virginia State College in 1945 and his alma mater, Amherst College, in 1947. In 1946, he was elected to the International College of Surgeons. But perhaps Drew's greatest legacy was not the awards or even the plasma program. It was the generation of black physicians he trained at Howard University. He devoted himself to mentoring medical students and surgical residents, demanding excellence and providing the example of what excellence looked like. The segregated District of Columbia chapter of the American Medical Association allowed only white doctors to join, and Drew passed away without ever being accepted for membership. Yet he trained surgeons who would integrate American medicine, who would prove that skill and dedication knew no color, who would carry forward his fight for equality. On April 1, 1950, Drew was driving to a medical conference in Tuskegee, Alabama. He had been working too hard, sleeping too little, driving too far. Near Burlington, North Carolina, his car went off the road. The crash caused massive injuries. Drew was rushed to a nearby hospital where white physicians provided prompt and competent care, but the damage was too severe. Charles Richard Drew died that morning. He was 45 years old. His death generated a persistent and powerful myth. Stories spread that he had been denied admission to the White Hospital or denied a blood transfusion because of his race. The terrible irony of the blood-banking pioneer dying for lack of blood proved too compelling to resist. But the stories were not true. They have been debunked repeatedly. Drew received immediate and appropriate medical care. His injuries were simply too catastrophic to survive. The myth persists because it captures a deeper truth. Drew lived his entire life confronting the absurdity and cruelty of racial discrimination. He was barred from donating to the blood program he created. He was denied membership in medical associations despite his qualifications. He watched talented black physicians struggle against barriers that had nothing to do with ability. The myth of his death reflects the real injustices he faced in life, even if the specific details are false. Today, Charles Richard Drew is remembered as the father of the blood bank. His portrait has appeared on postage stamps. Schools, hospitals, and research centers bear his name, the Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science in Los Angeles continues his mission of training physicians to serve underserved communities. Every time a trauma patient receives plasma in an emergency room, every time a soldier receives blood on a battlefield, every time a blood drive saves lives, Drew's legacy endures. The plasma separation idea that skeptics dismissed as impractical saved hundreds at Pearl Harbor and millions in the years that followed. The man whose blood was deemed unworthy of mixing with white soldiers' donations created the system that kept those soldiers alive. The African-American surgeon who was never admitted to the AMA trained surgeons who transformed American medicine. Drew once wrote about the challenge facing black scientists of his era. So much of our energy is spent in overcoming the constricting environment in which we live that little energy is left for creating new ideas or things. But whenever one breaks out of this high-walled prison by virtue of some worthwhile contribution, not only is he himself allowed more freedom, but part of the wall crumbles. Every student in science, Drew believed, should aim to knock down at least 1 or 2 bricks of that wall by virtue of his own accomplishment. Charles Richard Drew knocked down more than a few bricks. He demolished entire sections of the wall, and in doing so, he saved more lives than can ever be counted. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more untold histories of courage and genius. Until next time, remember that the ideas we ignore today may save us tomorrow.